made it this far through the tutorials, you'll notice a pattern where I'm trying to do the easy stuff first, then progressively get harder. This is the first video that I would consider to be closer to the medium category. So without further ado, let's get into our menus. Now, for a bit of context, menus are user widgets that we can interact with. We have the HUD at the moment down here in user interface, and we have a compass, and we don't really interact with them. They interact with us. This will be the first instance where we are interacting with a menu, and I'm going to include Gamepad support as well. So if you came here hoping that someone would show you how to do Gamepad support, you're in the right place. The first thing we'll do is right click, go to user interface, and create a widget blueprint. We're going to start calling them by menu. As we get more HUDs and more utilities and more menus, we'll organize them into folders. Now, the very first one I want to do is the pause menu, the menu that comes up when you would press escape on a keyboard or start on a gamepad. So we're going to call that simply pause. Open up the pause menu, and once we're here, let's go and grab ourselves a vertical box and drag that vertical box in. I want to anchor this to the entire widget, just like that. And then inside that vertical box, we're going to put some stuff that we can interact with. The first thing we can't interact with is going to be the title or the name of the menu, what it says at the very top. And you might think we're just going to grab a text box, and you'd be wrong. We're going to do this differently. It's going to take more work to set up, but it's going to save you so much work down the line. Clear the search menu and let's get a rich text block and drag that in. We could drag it right here on the vertical box, and we can also attach it directly to said vertical box. Our standard text block is more for us to hit and run whatever text we want to put in there. We just punch something in, we select a style, we're done. The rich text block receives a little more input inside of our graph. So we can actually set up a font for an entire menu as opposed to picking the font for each individual box. To do that, we're going to need a text style set. So we need to create that text style outside of the widget. Let's drag our menu over to this tab up here. We're going to click on the content folder and right click and create a new folder. And this folder is going to be called data. So here we want to right click, go up to miscellaneous and select data table. And then it's going to ask us what sort of row structure we want, which is just essentially the format of the table. Click the drop down and select rich text style row and hit OK. I'm going to preface mine with D for data, and I'm just going to call this standard text style. Because this I want to be essentially the default font for everything in my game. Double click on that and we're given this section. So the first thing we want to add is a row. Clicking the add button up here will add said row. And now if we drop down here, we can click the drop down and we have a whole bunch of options. The option we want to focus on the most is going to be the font. The entire reason we're doing this is so we can customize our font later on. So for this, we're going to need a font. I want you to literally grab any font you want. There are millions of free fonts online. I just want you to find a font, whether it's the one you want to use in your game, whether it's just a placeholder, it doesn't matter. I'm going to import my own font to use for this. So all I'm doing is going over to test, hit import. You can see here, this is the font that I selected just for the sake of this video. If you're given this option, just press yes and you will have imported your font. And I'm particularly using a ridiculous font so I can show you how easy it is to change this later on. So now inside of standard text style, when I hit the drop down, I have the option to use the Halo font. And this is also where I'll determine the size, because in here, this is just the default setting. And so when I use this standard text style set, it will use the default setting until specified otherwise. I'm going to show you an example of that right now. Hit F2 on this row and we can name it. I'm going to name this default because this is the default size. If you wanted your default size to be bigger, you would adjust that here. This is all to be adjusted later. Now I'm going to use the same font, but bigger when I want to use a title. So right click and hit duplicate and F2, and we'll call this title. And I'm going to make this 50 on the size. And I'll make my default 25. It's just a multiple of itself. With that done, hit save. We're popping back over to the test map and back over to our pause menu. Now, when I click the drop down, I have that standard style text to use. So here I can type in paused. And you'll notice that until you've compiled and saved the widget blueprint, it'll come up with some mumbo jumbo. But now, because I've compiled and saved and it's recognized the standard text style, now when I zoom in here, there is my paused text. It's purple because for some reason, if we pop back over to standard style text data table, the standard color is purple, which is weird. I don't know why. But we can now change that over here. And this is the catch. We change it inside the data table here. We don't change it inside the menu. So we'll recompile that. We do all of our changes inside of the data table. Seems like it's a roundabout way to go about it. Why wouldn't you just use a text block? But when I use another rich text block for anything else, I can make a change to this here and it will automatically change all the fonts. So maybe you can see where I'm going with this. You can use a placeholder font. You can get a feel for it without having to change every single font in your menu. If we did it the other way around, every single text block that we'd have to go and change the font for that. So this is how we do it without having to go crazy trying to change every single menu and potentially missing one, and then you finding out only after your game's released. So next up, we'll go back over to the vertical box, changing the alignment so it's actually centered. And because I've picked this particular anchor point being the entire menu, it's dealing with offsets instead of an actual position. If you don't like that, if you want to go the traditional way and decide the size of the box, you can just select this here and the box will size to whatever you tell it to size to, so long as you don't have size to content ticked. Now over here, you can see that we have the title preface or the title setting. To access said title setting, because this is a title, we would select the rich text box. And then here, we're going to get into a little bit of a coding language. So in the same box that your text is in, what I want you to type to access whatever your second category is a left arrow, then type in whatever the category is named. If you're copying me, then it's named title. And then at the end of that, put a right facing arrow. And then at the very end of the text, once you're done saying whatever you want to say, another left arrow, a forward slash, and a right arrow. And if I press enter on that, now we can see that the text has adjusted to the title's size. So this is how you can handle different types of fonts inside of your widget. Again, seems very roundabout, but once we start making a lot of menus, I'll show you how easy it is to change the font in future. Next up, I'm going to add buttons into the vertical box. This is what a button looks like by itself. Pretty ugly. So the first thing we're going to do with that button is change what the button looks like. Now with buttons, you have a few more options. You have the standard option, you have a hovered setting, and you have a pressed setting. And you can adjust the style of all of these to your heart's content. For me, I'm just going to hit 0 on the alpha and make it a see-through button, and the text will be what sits on top of said button. And when it's hovered, that's when I'll use a 0.5 alpha on there. So still a white background. So here I'm just using, under normal, I'm using the tint, and under hovered, I'm also using the tint. If you want to do something for pressed, you can also do that as well. And you also have the option for disabled. You can also assign sounds here, but we'll do sounds in another video. Now, at the moment, our button is stuck to the bottom of the screen. We don't want that. If I actually select the paused rich text block, you can see that I've selected fill here. So if I was to select auto, then the button would just sit right underneath there. But if I hit fill on either of these, it will, as described, fill up the entire box that it's in. For now, let's keep it on auto, and I'll show you a great way that you can use that once we've got our elements in here. Now, as with everything in our UI, we should be naming these. So I'm going to call this button underscore continue. So the first button in this menu is going to be to continue the game. Then I'm going to hold Control and press C. So I'm copying the button, select the vertical box, and I'm going to press V with Control held 4 more times. The problem with this method is that they will try and attach to each other. So if I was to Control Z them, selecting the vertical box between every paste will solve that problem. Now, obviously, all 4 of these buttons aren't going to just continue. So the second button is going to be save. The third button is going to be load. The fourth button is going to be options, and I'm just pressing F2 to get into these buttons. And the last option will be quit. Now, you can't actually see anything on screen at the moment because we need to put text inside these buttons. I'm going to follow the exact same trick there with the copying and the pasting. We're going to select this rich text block because it already has our font style inside it. Holding Control and pressing C on the rich text block and then selecting the button and then pasting the text block onto the button will put that text there. Being that this is our first rich text block that isn't going to be a title, let's remove that title preface and press enter. And now that should be our standard size. Now I'm going to copy that rich text block and paste that rich text block on all of our buttons. Now I'm going to select the rich text blocks and name them accordingly. So this will be continue. This will be save game. This will be load game. This will be options. And this will be quit. Now you can go 2 ways about this next section because I don't want these buttons stuck to the top. The first is back to our fill and we throw all those buttons right on the bottom right there. Select the button for quit, not the rich text block, because nothing will happen with the rich text block. Select the button, and here we select vertically align top and fill. And now our menu is pretty close to the center just by hitting fill on the topmost element and the bottommost element. The other thing you could do is put a spacer in here if you wanted and put a space between there and there, but we don't need to do that in this instance. And you've seen how spaces work in the previous video, so I will leave that to your discretion.